This is the Grok Cast, featuring the team of Grok Interactive, where we discuss all things web. Learn more at grok.fm.
This is Jason Ellis. I'm the CTO of Grok.
I'm Jason Strawn. I'm a CEO of Grok Interactive.
My name's Josh Freeman. I'm a software developer at Grok Interactive. I turn empathy and tacos into software.
Oh, I love that. And hey, guys, my name is Joseph Villafranca. I'm also a software developer at Grok.
And he eats the tacos.
And I eat all those tacos. Exactly.
That's right.
Oh, you missed some awesome tacos yesterday, by the way.
Oh, tacos. So we're all members of the team of Grok Interactive, a full-service web consultancy based in San Antonio, Texas, where we build web and mobile applications for our customers.
And apparently we have a weird taco fetish. So today we're going to be talking about the imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is often defined as a profound feeling of, inadequacy or self-doubt, or just feelings of intellectual fraudulence that persists even in the face of information that indicates that the exact opposite of true is true. Josh?
Yeah, so with imposter syndrome, I feel it goes in waves with me. So, when I first started working at Grok, I felt like I was just right on the edge of relevance and just barely keeping my head afloat. And then it got to the point when I started leading that project back in 2014. For the first half of it, I felt I was just on the edge of relevance, just barely trying to keep my head afloat. Joseph and Anton are forever talking about, me leading the project and drawing on my knowledge to kind of guide them on which way to do. And I felt half the time like I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm making this up as I go along and just hoping and praying I'm making the right decisions as I go along. Sometimes I didn't make the right decisions, and I had to pay for it with lots of late nights. But that began to shift, and towards the end of that project, I got quite a bit of confidence, and I felt, okay, that I know what I'm doing here, and I don't have any concerns or frustrations of confidence. And then when I transitioned over to the Ruby world and started doing Ruby on Rails, that imposter syndrome came back, because I was back to just barely on the edge of competence, and I was getting brought in to work on projects to kind of support the current ongoing projects, and I felt that same thing all over again, that I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't understand why people are paying us for me to do this job. I'm about to get fired any moment now, and that eventually has gone away, and now I feel that I'm a very competent Rails programmer. But now I'm starting up a new technology, and I'm starting to feel that all over again, that why in the world are people asking my advice or opinions on this technology? I just read about it the other day. I don't know. And so for me, it goes in waves. And basically it goes from, I feel confident about one thing, okay, it's time for me to stretch my legs and try a new technology or a new pattern of thinking. And then I have to go through that process all over again.
I think it's common, though, right? I mean, I think this is something that all of us have gone through probably dozens of times in their career. I think it is probably a natural extension of the whole software development lifecycle, in that, especially if you've been around a long time. I mean, Jason and I, we've been writing for 20 years, and we've done this through multiple languages over the course of our career. And yeah, each time there's a point at which you step up to some new technology that's the latest cool buzzword, and you're just lost.
Yeah, I've always thought that you've got to stay relevant, so you're constantly learning new things over the career, and it happens all the time. It's like Jason said, it's part of the cycle of being a developer, and I think that it's probably part of the cycle of being a professional in almost any world that requires constant learning. Physicians, lawyers, etc., engineers. It's you've got to, when you're in a discipline that requires constantly being challenged with new things and having to constantly stay on that edge of technology, because certainly the way that we build applications today is dramatically different than the way we did 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, it changes that rapidly. And so I think imposter syndrome is inherent in these industries because, I mean, you're talking about moving to Ruby and having that experience. I'm having that experience, but with there being developers 20 years younger than me that are also having it, but they can learn much quicker and devote those long hours and weekends to constant coding. And so it doesn't go away. I'm sorry to tell you, it doesn't go away. You just get used to it.
Joseph, what's your perspective on this? Because, I mean, you've been programming professionally for a little over a year now. So what's your perspective?
Totally on the side of imposter syndrome, of course. I don't even know if I've had enough of the occasions where I actually get the confidence built up into me where I don't feel like the imposter anymore. Though recently, the experience of going through and presenting at a dev meetup was definitely the most recent point in my career where I kind of got over that and was helped by you guys to inspire that confidence in me to go out and do it. And I think so. I think what I have to add to it is the way you get over that is kind of gauging the community around you. Going into that presentation, I had just written a blog post on CQRS, and I did not feel like I was ready to stand up in front of 20 or 30 people and start talking about it, fielding questions and such. But as you start working through it and you start realizing how much less the people around you know about this subject, you do start to feel like you can sort of guide people through certain points of it. And I think that's when the confidence starts taking over that imposter syndrome. So gauging the community, I guess, is a great way to get over it.
So let's put this on its ear for a second. I mean, would you say that not having imposter syndrome would be a good thing or a bad thing? Because to me, it's, I think, a good trait to have, that you question your own ability when you're put in roles that are maybe outside of your typical comfort zone, when you're not doing something that you typically do in your daily routine. And you have that feeling of, what if they find out that I'm a fraud? What if they find out I don't know this as well as maybe somebody else does, or maybe as well as I should? But I think that that's what drives a lot of us to go and understand these new technologies on a professional level, is because we want to drive that feeling away. At least that's how it works for me. What about for you guys? Jason?
Well, so the thing that I agree with you. I think that is one of the many things that we as developers use to go learn, right? We know we don't know something, and we know that we're going to be responsible for knowing it, so we have to go out and figure it out. The downside to it, I think, is that, and I saw this a lot at IBM, is that there was this notion that if a developer wasn't that cocky, I know everything and I'm the king, if he didn't have that methodology or that attitude, then the upper management, who were so used to that, would think just naturally that, oh, this guy's not very good. And so even though, two developers don't know anything, the one that was the cocky one that said he knew it, they actually preferred that guy. So in a way, I think that's a negative, because it's not necessarily skill-based. It's entirely attitude-based.
So having it is good, wearing it on your sleeve might not be. Is that what you're saying?
That's kind of what I'm seeing. You summed up very nicely. Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Josh?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I think at first it bothered me. It surprised me and bothered me. And then I just kind of gone to accept the state of things, and that's just kind of how it's going to be. Where, here in this ecosystem, especially around Coda, where you're teaching people to become programmers, and so they're starting this learning process, is that all of a sudden I became this person who people sought out for opinions and advice, and for all intents and purposes is an expert whose opinion is to be sought out. And especially when I first joined Grok and was working on projects, that surprised me a lot. And I think part of it is due to my personality, and I have opinions, and I'm not shy about sharing them. But then also I do show that I guess being able to communicate those opinions to other people has made people feel it was approachable, and being a part of that surprised me. I guess I just learned to have to embrace it and continue to show that confidence even if I'm not necessarily sure. And I think one of the things that I have purposely worked to improve is when I don't know something, I don't try to make it up. I say, I have no idea, and this is where I'd probably go to find out, but I'm not going to guess off the spot. And I think that's helped stem some of the imposter syndrome for me, is just accepting the fact that, yeah, I have more experience, but I'm going to let you know when I don't know.
Yeah, and that to me makes you a better developer than a lot of others. I mean, any developer says, yeah, I know, or thinks they know, and they're just guessing. To me, that's not as good as somebody who says, I don't know, but I do know where to find out, and I know how to apply what I found. That to me is infinitely more valuable.
Yeah.
Joseph, what are your thoughts?
Well, definitely. I was just going to say, I mean, the thing about imposter syndrome is you have those doubts, and there's plenty of times when you are an imposter. And like Josh says, you have to kind of recognize when you might not know what it takes to lead the group around you. I think in essence, that's all it takes to be perceived as the leader, right? You're just going to get the people around you from the step they're currently on to the next step in whatever they're doing. So there's some times when you're not going to be able to fill that void, and you kind of have to recognize it individually. I think it makes you a better developer as you go on in your career.
Oh, absolutely. The best developers I've ever worked with in my career were the ones that could find an answer, that could find a good solution, not the ones that necessarily could ramble one off the top of their head. And to Josh's point, I think the biggest thing that we have to learn is to be able to recognize when we don't truly know the ins and outs of something, to say, I don't know, but I can find out. Because that's the biggest skill we can have, is to learn, is to be autodidactic, is to realize we don't know something and then go figure out how to learn it and to apply it. Josh, you were about to say something.
Well, my question to y'all was going to be, how does imposter syndrome manifest itself with you all? Because I know when I'm feeling it, I know some of the things that I feel and think. I'm curious if it's similar or different from y'all. For me, there's a lot of fear and self-doubt that arises, and I notice that I tend to spend more time in research mode, trying to understand something before I have enough confidence to feel that I can take a step forward with whatever it is. How does it manifest itself with y'all?
Actually, for me, I think the older that I've gotten, the less I have run-ins with imposter syndrome, and probably a lot of it's going back to that first place of I've just learned to own a lot of my lesser pretty qualities, however you want to look at that, right? And I've grown past a lot of the hang-ups on them. It doesn't mean that I'm immune to it. I still, I guess, can, but mainly I've learned to say I don't know, and to not be in roles that don't seem to fit. But no, certainly I get it. I run the, I'm part of the leadership team, and run this company, or from the executive level, and that can get scary sometimes. I mean, sometimes I look around and go, this is just me, I'm just an average guy, and people look to me for those leadership qualities, and that sometimes can get a little weird, or when students look at me and talk to me like I'm their professor when we're at Code Up, and it's like, no, I'm just some guy that writes code. There's my laptop, and that's what I do. So on that case, maybe a little bit, but not to the point. It's more of you're giving me qualities that I don't think I have. And so that's how I guess it is for me, is maybe now I'm flattered more with imposter syndrome, where 10 years ago I had the same kind of despair that you're describing of, oh no, what if they find out that I don't know everything about programming? Well, eventually I got to the point where I realized nobody ever will. You can do this your whole life, and there's always going to be languages that you'll never learn, and problems that you're never going to solve. And so to me, that's the big epiphany.
It's interesting you say that, because it doesn't manifest itself for me as fear of being found out, which is it's normal how for most people. For me, it's failure to be able to accomplish or solve a problem. That's what I get bothered by.
So like self-imposter syndrome. If I can't solve this, then maybe I should just go to truck driving school? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh, I feel that all the time.
All right.
That doesn't go away.
Great. I've still got that part to look forward to.
Oh yeah, truck driving school's easy too. So no, I'm very much the same way actually. I was always one in my early career who, self-doubt and beat myself up and would stall. I would find something else that needed to be done and go do that, as opposed to the other thing which I perceived as hard or outside my skill set, or just something that I wasn't able to do, to such a degree that I would just hope somebody else would tackle it. You know what I mean? Now I don't care anymore, and I will go so far as to ask people questions I don't care if I look stupid. It's like at one time that was a big concern. Oh, I don't want people to see that I'm stupid, that I don't want them to know that I don't know this. Now I'm like, I don't know that, so let me ask somebody. And I don't mind people thinking, gosh, why does this guy have to ask this? He shouldn't have to ask this. But you know what? If I don't ask, I'm never going to know, or I'll make a bad assumption or whatever. So yeah, for me anymore, I think it's just about, if I don't know it, I accept I don't know it. I own that I don't know it, and I try to find out. And if that means enlisting other people's help, whether I should know it or not, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, that dropping the ego thing is big, I think, in coding, as we all talk about sometimes. You just have to, if you leave the ego at the door, you're going to be so much better of a developer and be able to get to your solution so much quicker, because you don't have all this static noise in the background going on of not achieving what you're trying to achieve. I think, Josh, the way it manifests for myself, in other things that I've done in my life, I find some comfort compared to those things in the technical world, in the IT world, because everything is so technical. Most debates or most arguments have a lot of documents you can go and point to, back to, and say, this is the standard. This is widely accepted by this community or this community. And I think, at least when I am talking or communicating to other people, and what kind of keeps me at the same point, sort of in control of whether or not I'm being an imposter, but at the same point stirring more of the imposter syndrome in me, is I want to make sure that I clearly understand in my own way of thinking what I'm trying to communicate. And a lot of times I think when we're talking in the office, there's a lot of ors and ums and hums, when you're trying to communicate something to somebody, because you get to little points in your talking where you really haven't made those connections solid enough for yourself to be the expert on the subject, and it makes me go back, and it makes me try to be even more technically sound in what I'm communicating to other people.
I mean, that was the hardest part about last year, was when we started to adopt the CQS paradigm, where I spent 2 weekends researching it and reading about it and learning it, and then made the decision, okay, this is the way we're going to save ourselves and get out of this overly complected system that we've built. And we started going down and building it, and you and Anton would ask me questions about implementation and how do we test this and how does this work? And I had no idea. I had to take the time to figure it out, and it's like, well, you ask me a question, I go home for the day, I take time to research and test, and in the morning, I was like, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. And I guess I can see now from y'all's perspective how I seem to be the guy with all the answers, but the reality is that I had to figure it out. When you guys went home, and the next day I was like, okay, this is how we do it.
Yeah. So I think it goes back and plays off that same concept of like, you have to manage it within yourself, whether or not you really know what you're talking about. But at the same point, relative to the people around you, you may be 5 or 6 steps ahead of everybody else. So even with your own doubts, you can provide plenty of leadership to the people around you that are fascinated by the things that are coming out of your mouth.
So, I've had this happen several times this week. I've had this happen where someone's asked my opinion or advice from they're wanting to do a business thing or have this new app or whatever, and they say, I've just got this business idea. I don't know nothing about technology or any of that jazz, and I'm just a dummy when it comes to that. And I don't know about y'all, but that always bothers me when people say, you're smarter and you're smarter than me because you understand this technology thing, and in a very self-deprecating that way. And
people are defeatist. I agree with you. I cannot abide by somebody who says, I could never do that, because you know what? They're right. As soon as they defeat themselves, they're 100% correct. And that's where part of this whole syndrome, this problem comes in, is that we're doing it to ourselves.
Well, and the other side of that is the people that buy into their own brand. When people say, "Oh, you're so smart," and their answer is, "Well, yes, I am." The opposite of imposter syndrome, which is what
run the other way.
Yeah, narcissism, which also affects a lot of people in the web community. I mean, let's not get wrong. There's a lot of narcissists out there, and thankfully we're all in different rooms, so nobody's looking at me because.
Well, I mean, to that very point, I don't know if y'all come up with kind of your standard answer that you figured out to tell people, but mine, whenever someone says, "Oh, you're smart because you can do this thing," I'm like, "No, I'm not smart. I'm just persistent, and I've taken the time to figure it out and learn it." I didn't know software development 3-4 years ago. I taught myself all these things. I've taken the time to go and learn it, and if you put in the amount of effort and time that I have, you can be just as knowledgeable and capable.
Well, if it makes you feel better when people ask me how how I'm so smart about all this, I usually just answer I'm not. I just forward you Josh's answers. So I tell everybody you're smart too. I hope that helps.
No pressure.
Okay, stop.
We actually tell everyone to go talk to you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. Okay, so one of the things that I did want to talk about on the imposter syndrome topic real quick before we wrap it up is the concept. I think it was either Joseph or Josh, one of you had said, talking about, leaving ego in the backseat and, not bringing that into the workplace here or at least into your career in this field, because it can be such an inhibitor. We have to learn so much. We have to constantly be learning, and, you have to recognize that and know that. How does that affect, especially you, Joseph, newer to the industry, in the code review process? I remember really early in my career, a long time ago, code reviews weren't as structured and often as maybe they are now in most shops, especially not like they are in Grok. But when senior developers looked at my code, I was always somewhat terrified, like they were just going to look up and laugh and say, "What are you still doing here? Just go home." And, thankfully they didn't, and I got good feedback, and it helped make my career better. But talking about imposter syndrome, I remember sitting down sometimes with the senior devs when they were looking at my code, and I felt like a kindergartner who just turned in like their PhD dissertation, and it was about to get redlined and going, "Oh man, this is going to be bad," And so It never turned out that way, but it was still a frightening situation. Joseph, how about we start with you? How did code reviews affect the imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so I totally get what you're saying. It's really hard, especially in that aspect, for me to put my ego aside. It's like I really want to do a good job.
Specifically, talk about this week.
Yeah, now that I'm on Ruby and doing new things, I'm going back through that same process with Josh. Luckily, the last project, or the first project I was on at Grok, was also with Josh, and it was the same roles. So I think we've built up a little bit of rapport. That helps a lot, but it also helps when you have senior devs that are kind and they don't just rip apart your code and spit back feedback that makes you want to go cry in the corner, right? And yeah, so it is kind of something that you kind of feel like you're going out on a limb. I'm pushing up code, and I hope it's right. I really hope it's right, and I think that's like the thing to hold on throughout the code review process, is that you ultimately want it to be right. You don't ultimately want to be right yourself. You want your code to be the best at written in the best way possible, and that's what the senior devs around you hopefully are giving you. I think if you're ever in a situation where you don't feel like you're improving your code after code review, you should probably second guess your code review process. But it definitely helps. It definitely helps to just hold on to that. Ultimately, you want your code to be right. It may take a hammer and a chisel at points to kind of knock off the bad stuff, and there's going to be times, I think, when you went totally in the wrong direction. But it helps to build this communication up with somebody that knows more things about more of the pitfalls to code and more of the wrongdoings of it, and allow you to learn a better way to craft your code.
So putting that out in its ear, either Josh or Jason, being in a senior developer role, and also, for our listeners, Grok, every commit at Grok goes through a code review process, no matter who it goes through or comes from. So all code that goes to any application has been reviewed by at least one other developer. And so I'm interested to hear, though, from Josh or Jason, being in the senior dev position, knowing that your code review could be reviewed by one of your peers, or even one of your coworkers that's in a junior position, and they find issues. How does that play into the imposter syndrome?
Oh, man.
I think it has a huge role. I mean, especially someone who, I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, and then, I pass a something off, and Jeffrey looks at it, who has not been doing this for 20 years. And I don't want to say he just beats me up, because he's actually very kind about it, but he thinks of things that I just didn't think of, and that's embarrassing. It's not as much as imposter, like I feel like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. It's just like, wow, he just totally owned me on this particular code review. And that has happened more than once. It's good because I learn from it, which is ultimately what I have to take from that, but it can be embarrassing for me more than imposter syndrome. Josh?
So, I mean, your stories are our stories probably revolve around the same person. So, and that was the hard thing for me, is coming from PHP land. I left at the top of my game and working on PHP projects, and fortunately I had worked really hard to learn and understand object orientation, and so going over to Ruby, a lot of the same concepts and paradigms still applied. And so then it was mostly learning syntax and things of that nature. But there are still significant structural differences between how you write PHP and Ruby, in particular in Rails. And me and Jeffrey, I mean, he and I butted heads in the beginning, because I had certain approaches to building software based upon my experiences in PHP that didn't necessarily apply in Rails anymore. And it was very hard, where I knew what I was doing in this other language, but came to a new language, and I I felt like I was starting over. I felt like I was a little kid at the grown-ups table all over again, and not in the oh boy way, but like I'm out of place and I felt uncomfortable. And that's one thing that when I made an active effort when I was going through the transition with both Jeffrey and Christopher. Those were the two principals that were reviewing my Ruby code. Is I forced myself to have at least like a GoToMeeting or a screen hero share with them and go through the code together. That way we had we were able to hear the inflections in the voice, and we could talk about the code and understand that, unfortunately text is a kind of a lossy medium, and we tend to project certain feelings on text that don't necessarily exist. And so I had to actively work to make sure I had productive conversations with both Jeffrey and Christopher. And I felt that without their guidance and putting that in place where I was able to have conversations about the code, I would not have grown as quickly or as effectively as I could have. But yeah, those first few weeks and months were really, really, really hard for me because I felt like I had regressed in a bad way.
Yeah, I'm not bagging on any of those guys. They are great. And I have to wonder how much of that is because, their first language that they've now been working in for how many years is Ruby. And my first language was, Pascal.
Fortran.
Was machine language, was, I was calculating branch offsets, 6502 branch offsets in my head in, the 80s, and I've had to relearn. And so, yes, I think I have been a little lax sometimes in my relearning just because there's so much. So, yeah, I get it completely.
Grok Cast was produced by Phil Meady and Bill Oker, a mediocre production.
Nice. Perfect. That's the outro. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Grok Cast, produced by Grok Interactive, where we build custom web and mobile applications for a variety of clients. Learn more about us by visiting grok.fm.